Hello, Year 9. Welcome back from your Easter break. I hope it was really restful. I hope you managed to enjoy the sunshine and go out for your daily walks and keep yourself healthy. I am missing all of you, I have to be honest. So it's all a bit weird, isn't it? Starting back after Easter break and actually not being in the building. But we do have a really exciting story to read today. Something I remember reading probably when I was about your age, and I never forgot it. It's just something about this story that just kind of stayed in my head, and I've always loved it. And so I'm really excited about sharing this with you today. So, as you know, before Easter, we were looking at the Gothic horror tradition. It's a really important literary period. And we're going to move on. We're still going to focus on Edgar Allan Poe, which is the writer that you did some research on before Easter, and we read one of his short stories already, The Oval Portrait. This short story is called The Telltale Heart. Maybe some of you have heard of it. It is very famous. And as I say, it's one of my favourite short stories written by Edgar Allan Poe. It was written in 1843. And today's lesson really focuses on a core GCSE skill, something that really is going to be good grounding for you for next year. We're mainly going to be looking at how we apply historical context to literature, and I'm going to talk to you a bit more about what that actually means. But it's a way that we can understand text on a much deeper level, and we can use it in our essay writing and our analysis and our explanation of what's happening in these texts. We're also obviously going to look at how this short story fits in to the Gothic tradition. And of course, we're going to be thinking about the fact that we are reading a pre-20th century text. So there's lots of elements to it that are new. And as always, we're going to be learning some new vocabulary because vocabulary is king in English, isn't it? So without further ado, let's move on. So I've got this little image up for you here, and it shows us really all the different sort of periods from British literary history. So starting with Old English, Beowulf, hopefully you've heard of that. Middle English, where you'll have Chaucer, and then we've got the Renaissance and the Neoclassical, and then we get to the Romantic period and the Victorian period. And you will see that it's these two periods where the Gothic novel became popular. So it's people were writing Gothic literature in the 1700s. So sort of towards the end, towards the sort of middle really of the Romantic period. And so there was a bit of a sort of crossover. So during the time that the Romantics were writing, these Gothic stories started coming out and they were building in popularity. By the time we get to the Victorian period, they are incredibly popular with readers. And I just want you to think about what made these stories so popular during Victorian times. Why did Gothic horror stories really take off during the Victorian period? And that's what we're going to look at. And all of this is part of the historical context of a novel. What was happening at the time. Now we are currently living through, in the middle of, right now, a moment of historical importance. In the future, I'm sure there will be teachers that will be teaching this period, the lockdown time, the corona year, and there'll be all sorts of novels and short stories and articles that will come out and be written by writers during this time, and they will be heavily influenced by what is happening now. So there'll be lots and lots of things happening, and the way that the general public are feeling, and that will be reflected in the text that writers write right now. And so that's really what historical context is all about. So if we look at the Gothic tradition, we can see, why did it take off during the Victorian period? Well, let's tap in to some of the fears of the Victorians. Their fears, some of them are quite similar to ours, many of them are different for various reasons. So we start with they had a limited knowledge of science really in those days. So because of that, they relied a lot more on religion, superstition, the afterlife, and these were things that they really genuinely believed, as much as people believe in science now. And as you can see here, that Darwin's theory of evolution, wasn't even written until 1859. So there's a whole chunk of the Victorian period where we really didn't know where we came from. So whereas today there are lots and lots of people who are very superstitious and believe in the afterlife, I think in Victorian times that was taken a lot more seriously than it is today. It was also a very secret society. They were very afraid of being honest and open and transparent, and we're much more like that today. They never wanted to show weaknesses, so there was very much things kept behind closed doors. They didn't want to have all these windows where people could see into their houses. They wanted to be kept very secret. So quite a lot of novels during Victorian times focus on the appearance and reality as a major theme, because the things that people would like to show you, would like to appear to be, this is very much like Instagram actually, isn't it? Your Instagram photo versus the reality of what actually is happening at the time. And I suppose for Victorians, they didn't have Instagram, but they did kind of work on that level where, behind closed doors, they behaved in ways that perhaps we wouldn't expect. But they always showed a very sort of moral, upstanding sort of member of society to everybody on the outside. So this secrecy kind of led to other things as well. They also, because of course they had limited scientific knowledge, they had limited medical knowledge. So they were very sort of afraid of the unknown. They were very afraid of getting ill. They were quite obsessed with cleaning, cleaning all sorts of things. There are sort of articles about housekeepers having to scrub and clean bedposts until the hands bled and things like that, because their masters were very, very scared of getting ill. And of course, this is because people were dying over things like flus and various other diseases like TB and stuff that was out there. So, it really was a time to be afraid if you were unwell. Because of this limited medical knowledge, they of course are very scared of illness, but this transpired into something a lot more than that. They were also very judgmental and cruel about people who were born with deformities or people who had disabilities. And it was a very cruel society in that sense. So they actually genuinely feared anybody who had some deformed thing on their face or their body, or they were disabled, and they started to believe there was something evil about them. And so you'll find that a lot of novels at the time, anyone who is evil has some kind of deformity, and if you were sort of quite a handsome chap, then you were to be trusted. But if you had a big boil on your face, then perhaps you couldn't be trusted. And they genuinely worked on that level. So you'll think there's lots of things. Next year you'll study A Christmas Carol, and you'll notice that Scrooge, and you're probably aware of the story anyway, Scrooge is described by Dickens in an awful lot of detail, with having some really ugly, quite deformed features, because he's not a very nice character at the beginning. So therefore playing into the Victorian fears. They were also very afraid of madness. It goes back to their limited medical knowledge and limited science knowledge, but they didn't understand anything about mental health. So anybody who was suffering with their mental health was just shut up in a mental institute, as they call it, And anyone who is interested, it's quite a harrowing but very interesting article by Nellie Bly, who wrote 10 Days in a Madhouse in 1887. It was a breakthrough article written by a woman. She pretended to be mad to get into the madhouses of the Victorian times, and she wrote a journalistic diary of how she was treated and what happened, and it's really appalling how people were treated. There was such a lack of understanding about mental health in those days, and people were very afraid, very, very afraid of this. So that was one of their fears as well. Of course, it was a very divided society. The rich were very rich and the poor were incredibly poor. And you can see here, there are two pictures I've put here of a poor woman with her baby, homeless, doesn't have a thing, in contrast to this lavish banquet being held by this rich family with servants and more food than they need. And so society was very divided in that sense. And that created a lot of crime. And London in particular has been reported many times in various articles from Victorian times having such high crime rates that there were certain areas of London that you just would not go into at all, because they were so dangerous. There's lots of things. I mean, if you Google Victorian London, you will see lots of stuff. And of course, it was during this time that Jack the Ripper terrorised Victorian streets, murdering prostitutes. So people were very afraid. So crime, another big thing that they are afraid of. They very much wanted to lock their door and have very, very tight, stable locks so nobody could get in. They're very much afraid of that as well. So that is a very sort of quick capsule knowledge of what Victorians were generally afraid of and what they were like. And I think knowing and understanding this information about the society at the time is absolutely crucial to your understanding of a Victorian text, which is what we're going to read. And this is what's called social and historical context. So knowing this information is going to help you understand Edgar Allan Poe's short story at a much deeper level, because you're going to understand the ideas and the beliefs of the intended audience. So you're going to know why he's written certain things and what fears is he, tapping into for the Victorians. So you've got that social and historical context now. But understanding about the writer themselves is also useful, and we're going to watch just a very short video that's been put together about Edgar Allan Poe himself. So I'm just going to press play and remove my face from here. It's just a couple of minutes, so just watch this and then we'll talk about it afterwards.
Gothic literature emerged in the late 18th century with the publication of Horace Walpole's novel Castle of Otranto in 1764. The novel is part of a larger Gothic movement that included architecture and art. Castle of Otranto features many of the characteristics that would come to characterize the genre, including a focus on the past, intense emotion, and irrationality. In addition, Gothic works often featured old buildings like castles that held hidden passageways, considerable history, and secrets, often family secrets. This literature accented mystery and the supernatural. Edgar Allan Poe, for his part, helped to modernize the Gothic story by setting a number of his stories in urban settings and by focusing on psychological states. About a century after the publication of Castle of Otranto, short stories became more popular. This was a result of an increase in readers with disposable income, more efficient printing, and the popularity of magazines, which created a new marketplace for story writers. Poe played an active role in the magazine market as an editor of the Southern Literary Messenger, as well as by writing essays that laid out the rules of the short story. Poe's rules included that readers should be able to finish a story in one sitting, writers should strive for unity of effect from beginning with the story's first line, and that nothing should detract from the story's design. Stories should be imaginative, creative, and original, but they should always tell the truth about human nature. Some elements of Poe's life and psychology provide useful perspectives on his work. For example, while all Gothic fiction and most horror fiction focuses on death and suffering, Poe suffered more losses than many writers working in these genres. Both of Poe's parents died in December 1811 when he was 2 years old. The day his mother died, Poe was left alone in the house overnight with her corpse. Poe was taken in by John and Frances Allen and separated from his brother and sister. His foster mother, Frances, also died when he was young. His wife, Virginia, died when she was just 25. Scholars have attempted to diagnose Poe across time, reading the state of his psyche based on his writing, his action, and the reports of those who knew him. His ongoing depression and heavy drinking may have been due in part to his lifelong financial problems, as well as his unstable family history. Various biographers have characterized him as everything from angelic to downright devilish. Nonetheless, details of his life remain vague, and perhaps fittingly, the truth remains largely a mystery.
Hello, I'm back. Okay, so this has given us a little bit more background actually about Edgar Allan Poe. He had quite a difficult life, and I'm not going to say too much about it at this stage, but I think when we read The Telltale Heart, maybe you will have a deeper understanding of this story based on just that bit of knowledge we know about Edgar Allan Poe himself as a child and his life, and also what we know about Victorian fears as well. So here we go. So yeah, I haven't gone mad. They are vultures on the screen. They do link to the story. So before we start, I really just want you to have a look at these pictures of vultures and think about what you know about them. You know, what kind of birds are they? Well, they are birds of prey, but more importantly, how are they seen in society? How are they viewed by society? Are they viewed in a positive or a negative light? Now, if you're not sure, then pause this and Google it, have a look and see what you think. I don't want to say too much more about it now because I feel if I do, I might give away some stuff about the story. So the next point before we actually start reading, as we always do, we need to learn some essential vocabulary. Now there's some difficult vocabulary on there, and I've highlighted it as I always do in blue, and there's a modern English version on there, but these words are really useful for you to learn. So at this point, and please again, as I always say, don't skip this part. This is an essential part of your learning, and you will have a spelling test on this later in the week. Pause the video at this moment and just quickly Google these words or look them up in your dictionary and write down a definition. They come up in this part of the story that we're reading. So if you could do that now, please. Okay, hopefully you paused the video. You had a look at those words. You now have all this knowledge and know what these words all mean. So you're not going to have a problem as we read on. We are going to start reading this story. So it's called The Telltale Heart. It's by Edgar Allan Poe, and it was written in 1843. True. Nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am, but why will you say that I am mad? This disease has sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of acute hearing. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object there was none. Passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Just pause for a second. Okay, what do you think was wrong with the old man's eye? It could be lots of things, but as people get older, they get all sorts of problems with their eyes, don't they? It could be that he was blind, and you can see here the quote: "He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it." I suppose I found this picture. I suppose it might be something like that. It's some sort of deformity, isn't it? Now we know how Victorians felt about that. So let's read on. Actually, no, we're going to do a quick check first. Right, so at the start, the narrator says he's feeling what? Yes, found it? Dreadfully nervous. Okay, so he's got a nervous disposition. He's feeling anxious right now. Okay. How do we know that the narrator has been ill? Where does it say it? The disease has sharpened my senses. Okay, so we don't know much about it. We don't need to know much about it. I mean, he's talking directly to us, isn't he? He's just saying it's sharpened his senses. It's not destroyed. It's not dulled them. He's trying to make us believe that he's fine. The narrator starts by trying to convince the reader that he's not what? Found it? How then am I mad? He's trying to convince us that he is not mad, and that he may well have had an illness, and that maybe it's had an effect on him, but actually he's not mad. He's very calm, and he's going to try and prove that to us. Oops, gone one too far. What is the idea that he had conceived? Right, well, he tells us here that this idea had entered his brain and it been conceived, it been born, this idea. You don't tell us straight away what's been conceived, but we learn later on. What is it? Yeah, that's right. Kill the old man. Casually as he thinks, I've just come up with this idea, I'm just going to kill the old man. How does he feel about the old man? He does tell us. Yep, he loved him. There you go. Had nothing against him at all. Why then does he want to kill him? It's that eye, isn't it? It's that eye of the vulture that he says. Pale blue eye with a film over it. It bothers him. So he doesn't like his eye. So he wants to kill him. There you go. There's nothing mad about that, is there? Okay, good. Well done. Right, let's read on. Now, this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with caution, what with foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, and oh so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed so that no light shone out, and then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Ha! Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously. Oh, so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights, every night just at midnight. But I found the eye was always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty, happy tone, and inquiring how has passed the night. So you see, he would have been a very profound old man indeed to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. At this point, I would like you to stop and make a prediction. Okay, what do you think happens next to the old man? What does the narrator do? And I'd like you to write it down and send it to me on Show My Homework, and I'm going to do shout outs to the most creative ones. Now, don't go on and cheat and see what happens next, okay? I want your ideas. They can be as wild as you want them to be, okay? So just pause at this point and make a note of what you think happens next. Go. Okay, hopefully you've all stopped, made your predictions, and after this you're going to upload your predictions to me. I'll show my homework so I can see. Hopefully there are going to be some very creative ones on there. Okay, let's see. So the old man is in bed, his eye isn't opening, and the narrator is going in, sticking his head in very carefully every single night at midnight. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moved more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph. To think there I was, opening the door little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly as if startled. Now, you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch with a thick darkness, for the shutters were close fastened through fear of robbers, and so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily. I had my head in and was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprung up in bed crying out, "Who's there?" Okay, at this point, just have a little think. How do you feel about the old man at this stage? And what are your feelings towards the narrator? Are you feeling any sympathy for the old man? Are you feeling any emotions towards the narrator? Do you think he's crazy? Do you think he's clever? Have a think. I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed listening, just as I have done night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief. Oh no, it was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it has welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt, and pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise when he had turned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but he could not. He had been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor." A moose? Sorry. "It is only a mouse crossing the floor." Or, "It is merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he had found all in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim, and it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. There we go. That is where we're going to stop today. That is end of part 1. And I'm going to leave you with this question, okay? We've only read half the story. And next lesson, I will read the last half of the story to you. But at the beginning of this session, we looked at Victorian fears. We looked at Edgar Allan Poe and his background as well. So you now have this social and historical context, this knowledge that you need to have. And so I want you to try and apply that now to this question. How is Poe playing to Victorian fears in this story? Okay, so Victorians reading this story, what will hit them, what will really engage with their fears? Okay, so you might need to go back over this video and have a look, but I will upload this PowerPoint onto Show My Homework so that you can go on and read it again, that first half, in your own time and have a look back. If you think you have a good answer for me, then please do send it in to me. I'd love to read it, and we might start the next lesson with the answers to some of these answers to this question. So how is Poe playing to Victorian fears in this story? Now, if you are interested in reading any more Gothic literature, I'm going to be uploading onto Show My Homework a Gothic anthology, and there are lots of different extracts and poems in there. So if you are quite into this genre, then there is some more reading that you can do in your own time. So that's all for now. Thank you very much for listening. Tune into your next lesson, and I shall be checking Show My Homework for all of your ideas. Thank you very much. See you soon.